In the rugged frontier of Cottonwood Gulch, Colorado, 1875, a desperate choice by three young women would collide with the quiet determination of a struggling female rancher whose own losses had hardened her resolve, but not her heart. What began as an auction of human lives in a smoke-filled saloon would transform not just these four women, but an entire valley that had forgotten the meaning of compassion. This is the story of how courage and dignity can bloom even in the harshest conditions, and how family can be forged from the unlikeliest beginnings. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The last rays of sunset painted the weathered sign of the Rusty Nail Saloon in harsh gold as Josephine Mercer tied her mare to the hitching post. She pulled her worn leather coat tighter against the autumn chill, her calloused hands betraying years of ranch work that had turned a once refined Boston lady into a frontier survivor. At 32, the lines around her eyes told of both laughter and sorrow, though the latter had been more plentiful in recent years. "Evening, Miss Mercer," called Sam Thatcher, the livery owner, tipping his hat as he passed. "Unusual seeing you in town on a Tuesday." Josephine nodded curtly. "Supply run. Winter's coming early this year." She didn't mention her real purpose, the letter from the bank tucked inside her coat pocket, the one threatening foreclosure on the Broken Wheel Ranch unless she could make a payment by the end of the month. 5 years of drought, predators, and cattle disease had whittled her inheritance down to a handful of skinny cattle and a mountain of debt. Tonight's errand was a last, desperate attempt to secure enough supplies to make it through winter, while she figured out a longer-term solution. The saloon's interior was a fog of pipe smoke and raucous laughter. Josephine moved through the crowd, like a ghost, her tall frame and purposeful stride parting the sea of miners, cowboys, and drifters who filled the establishment. She spotted Harold Weber, the general store owner, at a corner table and made her way toward him. "Mr. Weber," she said, sliding into the seat across from him, "I've come about our arrangement." Weber's face fell at the sight of her. "Miss Mercer, I was hoping you wouldn't show. I can't extend any more credit. The whole town's struggling after the mine reduced operations." "I'm not asking for charity," Josephine replied, her voice low but firm. "Just enough supplies to last until spring. I can pay with labor. My hands can help with your warehouse inventory, and I can repair that roof you've been complaining about." Weber looked genuinely pained. "It's not up to me anymore. The Eastern investors who own my supply chain have new policies, cash only, especially for—" He hesitated. "For women running businesses alone?" Josephine finished, a bitter edge to her words. The commotion at the front of the saloon saved Weber from responding. A man in an expensive suit was climbing onto the bar, commanding attention with a brass bell. Conversations died down as curious patrons turned to listen. "Gentlemen of Cottonwood Gulch," the man's voice carried the smooth confidence of a practiced salesman. "I am Augustus Payne, representing Frontier Matrimonial Solutions. Tonight, I have a unique opportunity for the hard-working, lonely men of this fine establishment." Josephine turned away, uninterested in whatever snake oil this city slicker was peddling, but Weber's next words froze her in place. "It's starting," he whispered. "The bride auction." "The what?" Josephine hissed, swiveling back to stare at the man on the bar. "Behind me," Payne continued, gesturing dramatically, "are 3 young ladies newly arrived from the East, seeking husbands in this land of opportunity. Each comes with references attesting to her character, domestic skills, and suitability as a frontier wife." For the first time, Josephine noticed the 3 women standing against the wall behind the bar. They were dressed modestly but neatly, heads bowed, hands clasped before them. Even from a distance she could see they were trembling. The town council approved it, Weber explained quietly. Too many single men causing trouble. They figured wives might settle them down. They're selling women? Josephine's voice rose in indignation, drawing glares from nearby tables. Not selling exactly. Weber shifted uncomfortably. The money covers their passage west, room and board, while they're matched with suitable husbands and a small dowry. It's all legal. Josephine watched as Payne invited the first young woman to step forward, a slender blonde who couldn't be more than 18. Her face was pretty, but pinched with fear, as she was instructed to turn slowly for the audience's inspection. Miss Catherine Wilson, 20 years of age, educated in a Philadelphia finishing school, Payne announced. Accomplished in piano, needlework, and household management. Orphaned last winter and seeking a fresh start with a respectable husband. Bidding starts at $50. The men began calling out numbers, their voices betraying various degrees of intoxication and lust. Catherine's eyes remained fixed on the floor, her shoulders curving inward as if trying to disappear. "This is barbaric," Josephine muttered, rising from her seat. Weber caught her arm. "Don't make a scene, Josephine. These girls signed contracts. They knew what they were agreeing to. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story." "Did they?" She jerked her arm free. "Or were they desperate enough to sign anything that promised food and shelter?" As she moved closer to the bar, Josephine could see the other two young women more clearly. Beside the blonde stood a petite brunette with striking green eyes that darted nervously around the room, and a taller woman with auburn hair whose rigid posture suggested she was using every ounce of willpower to maintain her composure. $100, shouted a burly miner, raising his glass triumphantly as the other bidders fell silent. "Sold to Mr. Buchanan," Payne declared, marking something in his ledger. "You may claim your bride after the proceedings. Now, our second lovely candidate." The green-eyed brunette was pushed forward, her steps unsteady. Miss Rachel Morgan, 19 years of age, from a respectable Boston family, fallen on hard times after the financial panic, Payne announced. Trained in household medicine by her late grandmother, a skilled cook, and possessing a sweet temperament, suitable for a man seeking gentle companionship, bidding begins at $50. The bidding for Rachel was more spirited, quickly reaching $125. Josephine observed the men's faces. Some genuinely looked like they were seeking companionship, while others wore expressions that made her skin crawl. One particularly unsavory character, with yellow teeth and filthy clothes, was bidding aggressively, and Rachel visibly flinched whenever his voice rose above the others. $200! The yellow-toothed man slammed his money on the table, silencing the competition. "Going once, going twice," Payne began. $250, Josephine called out, her clear voice cutting through the smoky air. A hush fell over the saloon as every head turned to stare at her. Payne blinked in confusion. "Madam, this auction is for gentlemen seeking wives," he stammered. "You said nothing about gender restrictions in your opening announcement," Josephine replied coolly. "You invited bids from the people of Cottonwood Gulch. I am bidding $250. "This is ridiculous," Yellow Teeth sputtered, face reddening. "Women can't buy wives." "I'm not buying a wife," Josephine clarified, approaching the bar. "I'm purchasing Miss Morgan's contract, which is apparently legal tender in this establishment. Do you accept my bid, Mr. Payne? Or shall I discuss the legality of your operation with Judge Harrison tomorrow morning?" Payne hesitated, clearly calculating his options. "The bid is accepted," he finally said. $250. Yellow Teeth glowered but didn't counter. Rachel's eyes had widened, fixed on Josephine with a mixture of confusion and cautious hope. "Sold to the lady rancher," Payne declared uneasily. "And now our final bride of the evening." The auburn-haired woman stepped forward with dignity that couldn't quite mask her terror. She was older than the others, perhaps in her mid-20s, with intelligent eyes and a determined set to her jaw. Miss Eleanor Blackwood, 26 years of age, formerly a schoolteacher in Virginia, Payne announced, educated at a ladies' seminary, proficient in mathematics, literature and domestic sciences, seeking a husband of good character after losing her position due to school consolidation. Bidding starts at $50. The bidding for Eleanor was slower, her age apparently making her less desirable to the crowd. Josephine noticed a grey-haired man in the corner watching with calculated interest. His clothes marked him as wealthier than most, and the cold assessment in his eyes reminded her of cattle buyers inspecting stock. $90, the man finally called, his voice carrying authority that silenced the few competing bidders. $90 from Mr. Rutherford, Payne announced. Going once, going twice. 100, Josephine called. The saloon erupted in a mixture of laughter and outrage. Rutherford turned to stare at her with narrowed eyes. "The lady seems determined to build herself a harem," someone shouted, triggering more laughter. 120, Rutherford countered smoothly. 150, Josephine responded immediately. 200. The man's voice remained pleasant, but his eyes had hardened. Josephine hesitated. She had exactly $400 to her name, money she'd been saving for taxes and essential supplies. She'd already committed $250 for Rachel. Spending the rest would leave her nothing for the coming winter. 250, she offered, her heart pounding. 300. Rutherford didn't even hesitate. A murmur ran through the crowd. These were substantial sums in a frontier town where most laborers earned $1 a day. Josephine stepped closer to the bar, studying Eleanor's face. The woman's expression remained composed, but her eyes held a silent plea that Josephine recognized all too well, the desperate hope of someone who had run out of options. "I'm out," Josephine announced, turning away. A collective exhale rippled through the room, and Eleanor's shoulders slumped almost imperceptibly. "Sold to Mr. Rutherford for $300, Payne declared, visibly relieved that order was being restored. "And now our final offering of the evening," Payne continued, gesturing to the bar where Catherine had been returned. "Perhaps our most appealing bride." "I thought Miss Blackwood was the final bride," Josephine interrupted. Payne smiled thinly. "A slight misstatement on my part. Miss Wilson's earlier sale has been invalidated due to certain financial complications with the bidder. She is now available again to suitable gentlemen. Bidding restarts at $50. Josephine glanced at Catherine, whose reddened eyes suggested she'd been crying. The burly miner who had won her initially was nowhere to be seen. 100, called a voice from the back. 120, countered another. As the bidding continued, Josephine made her way to the bar and leaned in to speak quietly with Payne. "What happened to her first buyer?" she demanded. Payne's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Mr. Buchanan discovered his funds were insufficient. These things happen, and the girl was in his possession during this discovery." Payne ignored the question, turning back to the crowd. "I have 150. Do I hear 160? 200, Josephine called, drawing another round of jeers from the crowd. "The spinster rancher strikes again," someone shouted. Rutherford, who had been conversing with Eleanor in low tones, looked up with renewed interest. 220, called a man near the piano. 250, Josephine countered, knowing she was committing the last of her savings. The room quieted as bidders assessed whether the young blonde was worth pushing further. Catherine's eyes had finally lifted from the floor to stare at Josephine with a mixture of confusion and desperate hope. "$250 going once," Payne called, scanning the room. "Going twice." $500, Rutherford announced, calmly. A collective gasp swept through the saloon. Such a sum could buy a small cabin with land in the territory. Josephine turned to stare at the man, who met her gaze with cold amusement. He knew exactly what he was doing, not just bidding on Catherine, but deliberately thwarting Josephine's attempts to help. "For all three women," Rutherford clarified, addressing Payne directly. "I understand Miss Mercer has already committed to purchasing 2 contracts. I'm offering to buy out her interest and take all 3 ladies under my protection." "That's not how auctions work," Josephine protested, but her voice lacked conviction. She had already spent every penny she could afford. Payne looked uncertainly between them. "The contracts are legally binding once the sale is complete, but perhaps we could come to some arrangement." "There will be no arrangement," Josephine interrupted, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Miss Morgan's contract belongs to me. As for Miss Wilson, I bid $300. It was a bluff. She didn't have the money, but something in Rutherford's manner had triggered every protective instinct she possessed. $500 for Miss Wilson alone," Rutherford countered smoothly, "plus whatever Miss Mercer has already committed for Miss Morgan." Silence fell as everyone realized the implications. Rutherford wasn't just bidding. He was declaring war. "Mr. Rutherford," Josephine said quietly, "may I ask why you're suddenly interested in all 3 women when you initially bid on only one?" "Perhaps I share your apparent concern for their welfare," he replied with a thin smile. "Or perhaps I find your interference in men's business to be presumptuous and in need of correction." The threat in his words was unmistakable. Josephine had challenged the natural order by participating in the auction, and Rutherford was determined to put her in her place, even if it meant spending a small fortune. "The bid stands at $500 for Miss Wilson," Payne announced, eager to conclude the increasingly tense proceedings. "Going once, going twice." $800 for all 3 women," came a new voice from the doorway. Every head turned to see a tall figure silhouetted against the night sky. As he stepped into the light, Josephine recognized Thomas Reed, owner of the Twin Pines logging operation in the mountains north of town. He was a quiet man who rarely visited Cottonwood Gulch, preferring the solitude of his timber camp to town society. "Mr. Reed," Payne said, clearly flustered by this unexpected development, "I'm not sure the contracts can be combined in such a manner." $1,000, Reed said, approaching the bar. "Cash, payable immediately for all 3 contracts, including any already purchased by Miss Mercer." The saloon fell absolutely silent. $1,000 was a fortune in the territory, enough to buy a substantial ranch with cattle and equipment. "Mr. Reed," Josephine began, stepping toward him, "I appreciate your intervention, but—" He silenced her with a slight shake of his head, never taking his eyes off Payne. "The contracts, please," Reed said, placing a leather pouch on the bar. The heavy clink of gold coins emphasized the finality of his offer. Rutherford's face had darkened with anger, but even he couldn't match such a bid. With a contemptuous glance at Josephine and Reed, he turned and strode from the saloon. Payne, clearly eager to conclude the increasingly complicated transaction, quickly produced the necessary paperwork. "The ladies are yours, Mr. Reed, all legal and proper." Reed signed without reading, then turned to the 3 women who had been watching the proceedings with varying degrees of shock and apprehension. "Ladies," he said with a slight bow, "I apologize for this undignified situation. My wagon is outside when you're ready to depart." Catherine clung to Rachel's arm, both looking uncertain. Eleanor stepped forward, her schoolteacher's authority asserting itself. "Sir," she said quietly, While we appreciate your purchase of our contracts, might we inquire as to your intentions?" Reed's weathered face softened slightly. "To get you away from here before midnight, Miss Blackwood. The rest can be discussed somewhere more private." Josephine watched the exchange with growing suspicion. Reed was known to be a fair employer and had never had a reputation for impropriety, but his sudden appearance and extravagant bid made no sense. The logging camps were no place for gently raised Eastern women. "Mr. Reed," she said firmly, "I'd like a word before you depart with these women." He nodded once, then turned to the three. "Please wait in my wagon. Miss Mercer and I will join you shortly." Once the women had gathered their meager belongings and exited the saloon, Josephine confronted Reed in a quiet corner. "What game are you playing?" she demanded. "Those women have been through enough without becoming pawns in whatever scheme you're hatching." Reed studied her for a long moment. "No game, Miss Mercer. I came to town for supplies and heard about the auction. I have no intention of claiming any marital rights over these women." "Then why spend a fortune to buy their contracts?" "The same reason you were willing to spend your last dollar," he replied simply, "because it was the right thing to do." Josephine wasn't convinced. "And what happens to them now? Your logging camp is no place for women like them." "I agree. That's why I'm hoping you might offer them temporary shelter at your ranch." The request caught her completely off guard. "My ranch? I can barely feed myself right now." "I understand you're facing foreclosure," Reed said, lowering his voice. "The bank manager plays cards at my camp. I also understand you were planning to spend your last savings on these women rather than on supplies for winter." Josephine's face burned. "My financial situation is none of your concern." "Perhaps not," Reed conceded, "but I respect your principles. So I have a proposition. I'll pay you to house these women until spring, enough to cover your mortgage payment and winter supplies. By then, they can decide their own futures with clear heads." "Why?" Josephine asked, genuinely baffled. "Why spend so much money and then pay me more? What's your stake in this?" Reed's expression darkened. "I had a sister once. She came west as a mail-order bride. The man who received her—" He paused, composing himself. "She didn't survive the winter. I swore then that I'd never stand by while desperate women were traded like cattle." The sincerity in his voice was unmistakable. Josephine studied him, seeing past the gruff exterior to the pain beneath. "I don't need charity," she finally said. "It's not charity, it's employment. Those women need protection and guidance while they adjust to frontier life. You need money to save your ranch. This solves both problems." Outside, the three women waited anxiously in Reed's wagon, huddled together against the autumn chill. Their faces showed varying degrees of fear, confusion, and cautious hope as Josephine and Reed approached. "Ladies," Josephine said, making a decision, "Mr. Reed has made arrangements for you to stay at my ranch for the winter. You'll be safe there and free to determine your own futures come spring." "What's the catch?" Eleanor asked bluntly, her teacher's practicality asserting itself. "No catch," Reed answered. "Your contracts will be torn up once you're safely at the Broken Wheel Ranch. You'll be free women, beholden to no one." "Why would you do this?" Rachel asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Because not everyone in the West is a vulture," Josephine replied, climbing into the wagon beside them. "Though I admit we sometimes forget that ourselves." As the wagon pulled away from the Rusty Nail Saloon, Josephine glanced back at the garish establishment where human lives had been auctioned like livestock. The women beside her were strangers, each carrying their own burdens and secrets. She had no idea what challenges tomorrow would bring, but for tonight, at least, they were heading towards safety rather than further degradation. The road to the Broken Wheel Ranch stretched before them, a pale ribbon under the rising moon. Behind them, the lights of Cottonwood Gulch receded into darkness, along with whatever dreams or nightmares had brought these women west. Ahead lay uncertainty, but also possibility, a chance to forge something new from the ashes of desperate choices and lost hopes. As the wagon crested the first hill, Catherine finally spoke, her voice small but determined. "Thank you. Both of you." Josephine simply nodded, her thoughts already turning to the practical challenges ahead. 4 women alone on a failing ranch, winter approaching, and a town that would soon be buzzing with gossip about tonight's events. It wasn't the future she had imagined for herself, but perhaps it was the one she needed. Not just a struggle for survival, but a purpose worth fighting for. The stars emerged one by one above them, countless pinpricks of light in the vast Colorado sky as the unlikely group made their way home through the gathering darkness. The journey to Broken Wheel Ranch took over 2 hours along moonlit trails that wound through pine forests and across open meadows. Josephine drove the wagon in silence, giving the 3 women time to process the night's events. Catherine had fallen into an exhausted sleep against Rachel's shoulder, while Eleanor sat rigidly upright, her eyes constantly scanning their surroundings as if memorizing escape routes. "It's not much further," Josephine finally said as they crossed a shallow creek. "The ranch is just beyond that ridge." "And then what happens to us?" Eleanor asked, her voice steady despite the uncertainty in her eyes. "That's largely up to you," Josephine replied. "You'll have food and shelter through winter. Come spring, if you want to move on, Mr. Reed has promised funds for your passage wherever you choose to go." Rachel gently stroked Catherine's hair. "Why are you helping us? You don't know anything about us." Josephine considered the question as she guided the horses up a steep incline. "I know you're women who deserved better than being auctioned in the saloon. That's enough." The wagon crested the ridge, revealing a small valley bathed in moonlight. At its center stood a weathered 2-story farmhouse flanked by a barn, corral, and several outbuildings. Even in the darkness, the property's state of disrepair was evident. Sagging fence lines, a partially collapsed shed, and missing shingles on the barn roof. "Welcome to Broken Wheel Ranch," Josephine said without irony. "Named for the wagon. Wheel that broke and stranded my parents here 20 years ago." As they approached, a dog's bark broke the silence, followed by the appearance of a lantern moving across the yard. A stooped figure emerged from the shadows, an elderly man with a shotgun cradled in one arm, the lantern held high in his other hand. "Who goes there?" he called, voice cracking with age. "It's Josephine, Ezra," she called back. "I've brought guests." The old man lowered his shotgun, squinting as the wagon drew closer. "Mighty late for social calls, Miss Jo. These ladies will be staying with us for a while," Josephine explained as she pulled the team to a halt. "This is Mr. Ezra Simmons, my foreman, and the only hired hand I've been able to keep through the hard times." Ezra's rheumy eyes widened as he took in the 3 women. "Hired help? We can barely feed ourselves, let alone—" "Guests, Ezra," Josephine interrupted firmly. "We'll discuss the details tomorrow. For now, they need rest." The inside of the farmhouse was clean but sparse, reflecting years of economic struggle. A stone fireplace dominated the main room, flanked by worn furniture that had once been fine but now showed patches and careful repairs. Faded curtains hung at windows that had been meticulously washed, and the wooden floors gleamed with recent polishing. "It's not what you're accustomed to," Josephine said, lighting lamps to dispel the darkness. "But it's warm and secure." Catherine, now fully awake, looked around with undisguised relief. "It's wonderful," she whispered, as if afraid speaking too loudly might shatter this unexpected sanctuary. "There are 2 spare bedrooms upstairs," Josephine continued. "You'll need to share, I'm afraid. The kitchen's through there, and the washroom is off the back porch." Water comes from the pump in the yard. We don't have indoor plumbing." Eleanor nodded briskly. "We're grateful for your hospitality, Miss Mercer. I'm sure we can manage with whatever accommodations you can provide." "Call me Josephine, please. And I'll need you to call me Joe when we're in town. Formality raises questions I'd rather avoid." The next morning brought the first real opportunity to assess their situation in daylight. Josephine rose before dawn, as was her habit, and found Eleanor already in the kitchen, examining the nearly empty pantry with a frown. "Your supplies are critically low," the former schoolteacher observed without preamble. "There's barely enough here for a week, let alone a winter." Josephine poured herself coffee from the pot Eleanor had apparently already prepared. "I was supposed to stock up yesterday. Things didn't go according to plan." "Because you spent your money on Rachel's and contract instead," Eleanor deduced, her intelligent eyes missing nothing. "Mr. Reed will be bringing supplies today," Josephine said, avoiding direct confirmation. "Part of our arrangement." Eleanor closed the pantry door. "I need to understand what's happening here, Miss Mercer. What does Mr. Reed want from us?" "What do you want? Women in our position can't afford to misunderstand the terms of their keeping." The bluntness was refreshing after months of townsfolk dancing around Josephine's financial troubles with pitying glances and whispered comments. "Reed wants nothing beyond easing his conscience," Josephine replied. "As for me, I need help with the ranch. Not charity, but actual work. This place was designed to be run by a family. Since my parents died, I've been trying to manage with just Ezra and occasional day labor. It's not sustainable. So we work for our keep." Eleanor nodded. "That seems fair. What skills do you require? Can you cook? Adequately, though not elaborately. Can you milk a cow, mend clothes, preserve food, chop wood, or muck out stalls?" Eleanor's posture stiffened. "I taught arithmetic and literature to children of quality families. I'm not a farmhand." "No, you're a woman who was being sold." "Into the highest bidder 12 hours ago," Josephine countered, her voice gentle despite the harsh words. "Quality families weren't exactly lining up to help you then." The truth hung between them, uncomfortable but undeniable. Finally, Eleanor sighed. "I can learn," she conceded. "I'm not afraid of hard work, only of certain expectations men might have." "There'll be none of that here," Josephine assured her. "Just honest labor and mutual respect." By mid-morning, all three women had gathered in the kitchen. Rachel proved surprisingly knowledgeable about cooking, immediately taking charge of preparing breakfast from the meager supplies available. Catherine remained quiet, but watched everything with sharp eyes that belied her fragile appearance. "We should discuss duties," Josephine said as they ate. "This ranch operates on routine and division of labor. Everyone contributes according to their abilities." "I can cook and I know basic healing," Rachel offered. "My grandmother was a midwife." "I'm strong," Catherine said softly, speaking, up for the first time since their arrival. "Stronger than I look. I worked in my father's fields before he died." Eleanor straightened her shoulders. "I can keep accounts, write correspondence, and teach, perhaps not traditional ranch skills, but potentially useful nonetheless." Josephine nodded, impressed by their willingness despite their circumstances. "We'll start with the basics and adjust as we learn each other's strengths. Rachel, the kitchen and household medicine will be your domain. Catherine, you'll help Ezra with the livestock and repairs. Eleanor, I need someone to organize our records and correspondence. Years of neglect have left our business affairs in chaos." The arrival of Thomas Reed's wagon shortly after breakfast brought not only promised supplies, but an unexpected level of generosity. Sacks of flour, sugar, coffee and beans, smoked meats and preserved fruits, winter clothing, tools, medicine, even books and fabric for sewing. "This is far more than we discussed," Josephine said quietly as she and Reed unloaded the wagon away. From the women's hearing, Reed's weathered face remained impassive. Winter in Colorado requires proper preparation. This isn't just preparation, it's extravagance. I won't be indebted beyond our agreement. Consider it an investment in the ranch's recovery, Reed replied. I have a vested interest in seeing Broken Wheel survive. Your cattle operation complements my timber business. Josephine wasn't convinced. There are other ranches closer to your camp. None run by someone with your integrity. He handed her an envelope. The first payment as agreed. There's additional funds for any special needs the women might have. You're being suspiciously generous, Mr. Reed. His expression softened slightly. Perhaps I'm atoning for past failures. Does the reason matter if the help is genuine? Before Josephine could press further, Eleanor approached with a ledger she'd discovered in the study. Miss Mercer, I've been reviewing your accounts, she said, ignoring Reed's presence. Your financial situation is considerably worse than you've acknowledged. The bank isn't just threatening foreclosure. They've already initiated proceedings. Josephine felt her face flush with embarrassment. Those records were private. And outdated, Eleanor continued unperturbed. Based on these figures, you should have lost the ranch months ago. Reed's eyebrows rose. Is that true? Judge Harrison has been delaying the final paperwork, Josephine admitted reluctantly. He was friends with my father. Friendship won't hold off Eastern bankers indefinitely, Reed observed. No, Josephine agreed. But it bought me time to find a solution. And have you? Eleanor asked, her directness both challenging and refreshing. I'm working on it. The days that followed established a new rhythm at Broken Wheel Ranch. Each woman gradually found her place in the daily operations, their individual strengths emerging as they tackled the endless tasks required to prepare for winter. Rachel transformed the kitchen, organizing the new supplies with efficient precision and creating meals that made the most of limited ingredients. Her knowledge of herbal remedies proved valuable when one of the remaining milk cows developed an infection that threatened her udder. My grandmother taught me that yarrow prevents infection, she explained, as she applied a poultice to the cow's swollen teat. We used it during the war when medical supplies ran short. Catherine's farm experience translated well to ranch work. Despite her delicate appearance, she could fork hay, repair fencing, and handle animals with natural confidence. Her quiet nature concealed a determined spirit that emerged whenever physical challenges presented themselves. You're a natural with livestock, Ezra commented after watching her calm and nervous heifer. Got the touch, like Miss Jo's mother did. Eleanor's contribution was less visible but equally important. She brought order to years of neglected paperwork, uncovering both problems and potential opportunities in the ranch's disorganized affairs. You've been paying property taxes on land you don't use, she informed Josephine one evening, spreading maps across the dining table. This northern section has water rights that could be leased to neighboring properties. That land was meant for expansion, Josephine explained. My father always planned to increase the herd once the railroad came through. The railroad went 20 miles south instead, Eleanor pointed out. Holding on to a dream while drowning in debt isn't good business. The practicality stung, but Josephine couldn't deny the logic. What would you suggest? Lease the water rights to generate immediate income. Use the money to improve the viable portions of the ranch. Focus on quality over quantity until you're financially stable. As October gave way to November, the women's histories gradually emerged through quiet conversations around the evening fire. Catherine, they learned, had lost both parents to influenza and been forced to choose between marriage to her father's much older business partner or destitution. He said he'd give me time to mourn before exercising his rights, she explained, staring into the flames. But after the wedding he changed, became impatient. I fled with nothing but the clothes I was wearing. Rachel's story involved a stepfather who had made increasingly inappropriate advances after her mother's death. When I threatened to expose him to the church elders, he accused me of trying to seduce him. They believed him. He was a deacon. I had to leave Boston or face ruin. Eleanor's circumstances were different, but equally desperate. The school board decided married women made better teachers for young ladies, more maternal influence. When I refused the chairman's son's proposal, my position was eliminated. At 26, with no family connections, my options were severely limited. Josephine listened to these stories without sharing her own, maintaining the careful distance she had cultivated since inheriting the struggling ranch. But the women's presence gradually softened edges that had hardened through years of fighting the land, the elements, and the prejudices of those who believed a woman couldn't succeed in a man's world. The first significant test of their new arrangement came in late November, when a severe snowstorm isolated the ranch for nearly a week. With drifts piling against the buildings and temperatures plummeting, their survival depended on preparation and cooperation. "We need to move the remaining cattle to the south pasture, where the windbreak will protect them," Josephine announced, as the storm intensified. "Ezra's joints won't handle this weather. I'll need help." Catherine immediately volunteered, and together they fought through blinding snow to guide the small herd to shelter. When Catherine's horse stumbled in a hidden hole, throwing her into a snowbank, Josephine's heart nearly stopped. "Are you hurt?" she called, dismounting beside the fallen woman. Catherine struggled to her feet, snow coating her from head to toe. "Just my pride," she gasped, climbing back onto her horse with grim determination. "Let's finish this before we lose any animals." By the time they returned to the house, both women were half frozen but triumphant. The cattle were safe, and they had discovered in each other a shared resilience that transcended their different backgrounds. Rachel took charge of their recovery, preparing hot broth and herbal teas, while Eleanor organized a rotation for keeping. The fires burning throughout the night. The four women worked together with the seamless coordination of a family long accustomed to facing adversity together. As they gathered around the kitchen stove, warming their hands and sharing a simple meal, Josephine realized something had fundamentally changed. These women, initially strangers, brought together by desperate circumstances, had become something more. Not just workers or guests, but companions who understood the unique challenges they each faced in a world designed for men's success. "My father used to say that storms reveal character," Josephine said, breaking her usual reserve. "He would have approved of how you all handled today." "Tell us about him," Rachel encouraged, refilling Josephine's cup. "You rarely mention your parents." Josephine hesitated, then relented. "He was an educated man, a lawyer from Philadelphia who came west for his wife's health. My mother had consumption. Doctors thought the mountain air might help her." "Did it?" Catherine asked. "For a while, they built this place from nothing, learned ranching by trial and error. Mother recovered enough to have me, their only child. She lived to see me turn 16. Josephine's voice softened with memory. Father carried on alone for 8 more years before his heart gave out. The doctor said it was natural causes, but I always believed he died of loneliness." The women absorbed this rare glimpse into their hostess's past, understanding better the burden of legacy that drove her to save a failing ranch when selling might have been easier. "Is that why you helped us?" Eleanor asked. "Because you know what it means to be alone against the world." Josephine considered the question. "Perhaps, or maybe I recognize something in each of you that reminded me of her. That same determination to survive with dignity, regardless of circumstances." The storm raged for 3 more days, forcing them into close quarters and deepening their understanding of one another. By the time the skies cleared, something fundamental had shifted in their relationships. They were no longer benefactor and beneficiaries, but allies in the common cause of survival and self-determination. When Thomas Reed arrived after the roads cleared, bringing additional supplies and news from town, he found a transformed atmosphere at the ranch. The house felt lived in, with evidence of feminine touches that had been absent for years. Curtains, furniture rearranged for better function, the smell of baking bread permeating the air. "You've been busy," he observed to Josephine as they walked the property, assessing storm damage. "We all have," she corrected. "They're quick learners and hard workers." "And how are they adjusting to their circumstances?" Josephine considered the question carefully. "Better than expected. They're resilient women, survivors. Each day reveals new strengths in them." Reed nodded thoughtfully. "And in you as well, I suspect." "What does that mean?" "You've carried this ranch alone, since your father died, convinced that independence meant isolation. Perhaps having others to consider has reminded you there's strength in connection." Josephine bristled slightly. "I've always had Ezra." "Ezra works for you. These women are becoming your equals, your family, whether you intended it or not." The observation was uncomfortably perceptive. Something had indeed changed in Josephine over the past weeks, a softening of the rigid self-reliance that had defined her since inheritance thrust her into the role of ranch owner at 24. "They'll move on come spring," she said, deflecting the implication. "This is temporary." Reed studied her with knowing eyes. "Is it? They seem to be putting down roots. Miss Blackwood has reorganized your entire business approach. Miss Morgan has established quite an impressive herb garden in your kitchen window. And Miss Wilson moves through your barn like she was born to it." "What exactly are you suggesting, Mr. Reed?" "Only that people who have never had a home recognize one. When they find it, you've given them more than shelter. You've given them purpose and dignity. That's not something easily abandoned." As they approached the house, they could see the three women through the window, Eleanor at the table with account books, Rachel kneading dough, Catherine mending harness by the fire. The domestic tableau struck Josephine with unexpected force. Her house had become a home again, filled with the purposeful energy that had vanished with her mother's death. "Their contracts are void," Reed reminded her gently. "Come spring, they're free to choose their own paths. The question is, will you give them reason to stay?" That evening, as snowmelt dripped from the eaves and stars emerged in the clearing sky, Josephine sat alone on the porch, contemplating Reed's words. The ranch had always been her responsibility, her burden to bear. The idea of sharing it, truly sharing both its struggles and its potential, was foreign to her self-sufficient nature. Yet the past weeks had demonstrated what was possible when different strengths combined toward a common goal. Eleanor's business acumen, Rachel's nurturing skills, Catherine's affinity for the land and animals. Together, they complemented Josephine's knowledge and determination in ways that made the whole enterprise stronger. The door opened behind her, and Catherine stepped out, offering a steaming cup. "Rachel thought you might need this," she said, handing over the fragrant tea. "It gets cold out here after sunset." "Thank you," Josephine replied, surprised by the thoughtfulness. "You should be resting. Tomorrow will be busy with storm cleanup." Catherine settled beside her on the bench instead. "May I ask you something? Personal?" "You can ask. I might not answer." "Why didn't you ever marry? A woman with your own ranch? You must have had suitors." Josephine nearly deflected the question with her usual reserve, but something in Catherine's genuine curiosity prompted honesty. "There were offers, especially when my father was alive," she admitted. "But I saw what happened to other women when they married. Their property became their husband's property. Their opinions became secondary. Their independence disappeared." "Not all men are like that," Catherine suggested. "Perhaps not. But the Law is, a married woman has few legal rights to her own property. This ranch is everything to me, not just land and livestock, but my parents' dream, their legacy. I couldn't risk losing control of it. Catherine nodded thoughtfully. I understand that fear. When I agreed to the mail order arrangement, I thought I was choosing security over freedom. I didn't realize I might lose both. They sat in companionable silence, watching stars emerge above the snow-covered mountains. Whatever happens when spring comes, Catherine said finally, I want you to know that what you did for us, it wasn't just charity, it was salvation. You showed us that women can determine their own fates, even when the world tries to auction them to the highest bidder. The simple gratitude touched Josephine more deeply than she expected. For years, she had measured her worth by her ability to maintain the ranch against increasingly impossible odds. Catherine's words suggested another kind of value, not in what she owned or preserved, but in what she had given to others who needed it most. As Catherine returned inside, Josephine remained on the porch, watching the moon rise over her property. The Broken Wheel Ranch had never been just land to her. It was identity, purpose, and connection to those she had lost. Now, unexpectedly, it was becoming something new, a haven where four women from vastly different backgrounds might forge a future based not on society's expectations, but on their own determination to create lives worth living. The question remained whether this temporary arrangement could or should become permanent. Spring would bring choices for all of them, choices that would test not just their practical partnership, but the deeper bonds forming beneath the surface of daily work and shared meals. For the first time since her father's death, Josephine allowed herself to imagine a future for the ranch that extended beyond mere survival, one that included voices besides her own, ideas she hadn't considered, and perhaps even a kind of family she had never expected to find. December transformed the Colorado landscape into a realm of pristine white and crystalline blue, the mountains standing sentinel around the valley where Broken Wheel Ranch nestled like an island of warmth in a frozen sea. The short days and long nights created a cocoon around the four women, giving them time to build not just a functioning household, but something that increasingly resembled a family. The Christmas season approached with a quiet energy that surprised Josephine, who had treated the holiday as just another workday since her father's death. She returned from checking fence lines one afternoon to find the house transformed, pine boughs draped over mantels, red berries gathered in small arrangements, and delicious smells emanating from the kitchen. "What's all this?" she asked, stomping snow from her boots in the entry. Rachel emerged from the kitchen, flour dusting her apron. "We thought some holiday cheer might be welcome. Catherine found the decorations in the attic, and Eleanor discovered your mother's recipe book. I hope you don't mind." Josephine ran her fingers over the worn leather cookbook, recognizing her mother's elegant handwriting on the pages Rachel had marked. "Christmas gingerbread," she read aloud. "I'd forgotten about this tradition." "We can put everything away if it brings painful memories," Rachel offered, misinterpreting Josephine's expression. "No," Josephine said quickly. "It's just been a long time. The decorations look nice." That evening, as they sat around the fire with mugs of spiced cider, Eleanor produced a small stack of paper from her apron pocket. "I took the liberty of organizing some ideas for improving the ranch's prospects," she said, passing the meticulously written notes to Josephine. "There are several approaches we might consider for the coming year." Josephine reviewed the proposals with growing interest. Eleanor had identified opportunities she hadn't considered: leasing water rights to neighboring properties, establishing a small dairy operation to supplement beef production, even starting a vegetable garden extensive, enough to sell surplus in town during summer months. These are excellent suggestions, Josephine acknowledged, but they all require initial investment we don't have. Actually, Eleanor replied, I've calculated that by reallocating resources and postponing certain expenses, we could implement these changes with minimal additional funding. Rachel and Catherine leaned forward, clearly already familiar with the plans. We've been discussing how we might contribute, Catherine explained. I worked with dairy cows on my father's farm. I could manage that operation with minimal oversight. And I can establish the medicinal herb garden alongside vegetables, Rachel added. There's always demand for properly prepared remedies, especially in remote areas. Josephine looked at the three women, struck by their investment in the ranch's future. They were no longer simply working for their keep, they were planning beyond the winter, beyond their expected departure in spring. These are long-term proposals, she observed carefully. Our arrangement was only until spring. A weighted silence fell over the room. Finally, Eleanor spoke, her teacher's precision giving voice to what they had all been considering. We've discussed that. While we appreciate your generosity and Mr. Reed's intervention, we're not interested in remaining charity cases. If these initiatives prove successful, they would justify our continued presence as legitimate business partners rather than temporary guests. Business partners, Josephine repeated, testing the concept. Each contributing according to her skills, Eleanor continued. I would manage accounts and correspondence. Catherine would oversee the dairy production. Rachel would develop the gardening and medicinal preparations, while you would continue running the cattle operation and overall ranch management. And Ezra, Josephine asked, thinking of her loyal foreman, would continue as foreman, of course, Eleanor assured her. His knowledge of the land is invaluable. Josephine studied the detailed plans, impressed by their thoughtfulness and practicality. These women, despite their limited time at the ranch, had developed a vision for its future that aligned with her own hopes while expanding them in directions she hadn't considered. I'll need time to review the specifics, she said finally, but the general approach has merit. That night, alone in her room, Josephine reread Eleanor's proposals, adding her own notes and calculations. The concept of partnership rather than ownership was foreign to her independent nature, but she couldn't deny the potential benefits. For years, she had been fighting a losing battle against financial pressures, weather, and market forces. The possibility of sharing that burden, not just the work, but the decision-making and responsibility, both frightened and attracted her. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. She opened it to find Rachel holding a steaming cup. I thought you might need this, she said, offering the herbal tea. You've been working late. Josephine accepted the cup with a grateful nod. These plans of Eleanor's, they're quite comprehensive. She was up for 3 nights straight, drafting them, Rachel said with a smile. Teaching wasn't her only talent. She has a mind for business that most men would envy. And you and Catherine? Are you equally committed to this idea of partnership? Rachel's expression grew serious. We've all had our independence stripped away in different ways. Catherine, through her father's death. Eleanor through professional discrimination. Me through family betrayal. What you've offered us here isn't just shelter or employment, but the chance to rebuild our lives on our own terms. It's a struggling ranch in the middle of nowhere, Josephine pointed out. Hardly the opportunity most women dream of. Perhaps not, Rachel agreed, but it's ours to shape if we choose it. That's a freedom none of us has experienced before. After Rachel left, Josephine sat by her window, watching moonlight illuminate the snow-covered valley. Her parents had come west, seeking not just health, but the freedom to create something of their own. They had passed that dream to her, along with the responsibility of maintaining it. Now, unexpectedly, others were asking to share both the dream and the burden. The question was whether she could truly open her hand around something she had held so tightly for so long, The following weeks brought practical tests of their proposed partnership as winter deepened around them. When the barn roof began leaking after a heavy snow, they tackled repairs together, with Catherine and Josephine handling the dangerous work on the roof, while Eleanor managed supplies and Rachel prepared hot meals and medicinal teas for chilled bodies. When one of the pregnant heifers developed complications during calving, they worked through the night together, following Rachel's careful instructions to save both mother and calf. Their different skills complemented each other naturally, creating a whole greater than its individual parts. Thomas Reed's visits became regular occurrences, ostensibly to check on the women's welfare and deliver supplies. But Josephine noticed his attention focused increasingly on Eleanor. Their debates about business strategies and territorial politics often continued long after the others had retired for the evening. "He admires your intelligence," Josephine observed to Eleanor after one such evening. "It's refreshing to see a man value a woman's mind." Eleanor's usually composed expression softened slightly. "He's an interesting man, self-educated but remarkably well-read. His perspectives on territorial development are quite progressive." "And his perspectives on independent women?" Josephine pressed gently. "He seems to prefer them to the alternative," Eleanor replied with uncharacteristic humor, "though I've made it clear that my potential interest in him doesn't supersede my commitment to our plans here." "You've discussed the partnership proposal with him?" Josephine asked, surprised. "In general terms, he thinks it's an excellent idea, financially sound and socially forward-thinking." Eleanor hesitated, then added, "He also mentioned that such an arrangement might qualify for certain territorial development grants available to innovative agricultural enterprises." The practical implications were significant. Government grants could provide the capital needed to implement their expansion plans without further debt. But more striking to Josephine was the realization that Eleanor had been quietly laying groundwork for their partnership beyond the ranch, seeking external validation and support for their unconventional arrangement. January brought a week of bitter cold that tested even the most experienced rancher's resolve. Temperatures plunged so low that breath crystallized instantly and exposed skin could freeze in minutes. Livestock required constant attention to prevent freezing, and the house demanded endless feeding of fires to maintain survivable temperatures. During this brutal period, Catherine fell ill with a dangerous fever after hours working in the frigid barn. For 3 days, her life hung in the balance as Rachel applied every remedy in her considerable knowledge, while the others maintained round-the-clock vigils. On the second night, delirious with fever, Catherine clutched Josephine's hand. "Don't let them take me back," she begged, clearly confused about where and when she was. "I can't go back to him." "You're safe, Catherine," Josephine assured her, bathing her forehead with cool cloths. "No one will take you anywhere against your will." "Promise me," Catherine insisted, her eyes bright with fever. "Promise me I can stay." "I promise," Josephine whispered, the words coming more easily than she had expected. "This is your home. Now, for as long as you want it." Rachel, mixing herbal remedies nearby, caught Josephine's eye over Catherine's bed. The significance of the promise wasn't lost on either of them. When Catherine's fever finally broke on the 3rd day, the relief that swept through the household revealed how deeply intertwined their lives had become. They had faced death together and emerged with their bonds strengthened, their commitment to one another no longer theoretical but proven in crisis. "I meant what I said," Josephine told Rachel later, as they finally allowed themselves much-needed rest, "about this being her home, being all of your homes, if that's what you want." Rachel's tired face brightened. "You're considering the partnership?" "Then, more than considering, I think it may be the answer we've all been seeking, though there will be challenges we haven't anticipated." "Like the town's reaction?" Rachel guessed. Josephine nodded. "Cottonwood Gulch is traditional in its views. 4 women running a ranch as equal partners will raise eyebrows at best, active opposition at worst. We've all faced societal disapproval before, Rachel pointed out. At least this time we'll face it together on our own terms. As January gave way to February, their partnership plans evolved from theoretical discussions to concrete preparations. Eleanor drafted formal articles of partnership that would give each woman an equal voice in decisions while recognizing Josephine's larger initial contribution of property. Rachel began expanding her indoor herb garden in preparation for spring planting, while Catherine, fully recovered, worked with Josephine to identify the best locations for the proposed dairy operation. Their first significant test as business partners came unexpectedly one bitter February morning when Ezra arrived at breakfast with news that neighboring rancher Morris Jenkins was running cattle on Broken Wheel's northern pasture. "Saw 'em myself," the old foreman reported indignantly. "His brand clear as day, 40 head at least." "That's our land," Catherine protested, "even if we're not using it currently." "Jenkins has been eyeing that pasture for years," Josephine explained. "He probably assumes we're too weak to defend our boundaries now." "What will you do?" Rachel asked. Josephine considered the options. Traditionally, such disputes could escalate quickly into dangerous confrontations. With limited manpower and resources, a direct challenge could put them all at risk. "I'll ride over and discuss it with him," she decided. "Remind him where the property lines are." "Alone?" Eleanor asked sharply. "That seems unwise. Jenkins isn't dangerous, just opportunistic," Josephine assured them. "And confronting him with a group might make him defensive." Despite her confident words, Josephine was uneasy as she rode toward Jenkins' ranch later that morning. Boundary disputes between ranchers sometimes turned violent, and as a woman, challenging a man's actions, she was at a disadvantage regardless of legal rights. She was halfway to the Jenkins property when she spotted 3 riders approaching, Morris Jenkins himself, flanked by 2 of his hands. She straightened in her saddle, presenting the confident image that had served her well in previous dealings with neighboring ranchers. "Morning, Morris," she called as they drew near. "I was just coming to see you." Jenkins, a burly man in his 50s with a perpetually sunburned face, reined his horse to a stop. "Josephine, heard you had some city women staying with you." "Unusual arrangement. They're partners now, not guests," Josephine corrected, "which brings me to the reason for my visit. Your cattle are grazing on Broken Wheel land." Jenkins didn't bother denying it. "That north pasture's been sitting empty for years, seems a waste with grass going uneaten. Nevertheless, it's our property. Those cattle need to be moved by tomorrow." Jenkins's expression hardened. "That's mighty unfriendly, considering your situation. Word is the bank's about to foreclose any day now. I was planning to make an offer on that section once they did." So that explained his boldness. He believed the ranch was already effectively lost. Josephine kept her face impassive, not wanting to reveal that Eleanor's financial restructuring and Reed's intervention had temporarily stabilized their position with the bank. "The Broken Wheel isn't being foreclosed," she stated firmly, "and that pasture isn't for sale or use without permission." Jenkins leaned forward in his saddle. "Look, Josephine, your daddy was a good man, but he's been gone 8 years now. You've done your best, but everyone knows a woman can't run a cattle operation alone. Why not sell to someone who can make proper use of the land?" The condescension in his tone would have infuriated her a year ago. Now, secure in the knowledge that she was no longer facing these challenges alone, she felt only calm determination. "I'm not alone anymore," she replied evenly, "and the Broken Wheel is expanding operations this spring, not selling out. You have until tomorrow to move those cattle, Morris. After that, we'll consider them trespassing and act accordingly." Without waiting for his response, she turned her horse and rode away, back straight and chin high. It was a calculated risk, turning her back on an angry man, but she understood the language of the frontier. Showing fear would only invite further encroachment. She was halfway back to the ranch when she heard hoofbeats behind her. Tensing, she turned to see Catherine riding hard to catch up, a rifle across her saddle. "What are you doing here?" Josephine demanded once Catherine reached her. "Following you," Catherine admitted without apology. "Eleanor thought you shouldn't confront Jenkins alone, and I agreed. I told you I could handle it." "And you did," Catherine acknowledged. "But if things had gone badly, I was ready to provide assistance." Josephine wanted to be angry at the presumption, but found herself touched instead. No one had watched her back since her father died. She had faced every challenge alone, pride preventing her from acknowledging how desperately she sometimes needed support. "Jenkins believes the bank is about to foreclose," she told Catherine as they rode side by side. "That's why he's pushing boundaries now." "Is he right?" "Not anymore, thanks to Eleanor's refinancing strategy and Reed's investment. But Jenkins doesn't know that." Catherine considered this. "So he'll likely test us again to see if we'll defend our claim." "Probably. The north pasture is valuable, good water and protected grazing. If he thinks we're vulnerable, he'll keep pushing." "Then we need to demonstrate that we're not vulnerable," Catherine concluded with simple practicality. "All of us, together." When they returned to the ranch and explained the situation, Eleanor immediately began drafting formal trespass notices while Rachel prepared supplies for what might be a confrontation the following day. There was no debate about whether they would all participate. It was assumed they would face this challenge as the partners they had committed to becoming. The next morning, all 4 women rode to the northern pasture, each dressed for practical work but also with deliberate attention to presentation. Eleanor wore her most formal riding habit, looking every inch the educated businesswoman. Rachel carried her medical bag, prepared for any emergency. Catherine brought tools for repairing the boundary fence that Jenkins' cattle had damaged. And Josephine led them with the confident authority of a woman defending what was rightfully hers. They found Jenkins and 3 ranch hands already gathering the trespassing cattle, driving them toward the property boundary. The neighboring rancher's face registered surprise, and then grudging respect when he saw the unified front approaching. "Came to check our handiwork?" he called as they drew near. "We're moving them as requested." "We came to repair the fence your cattle damaged," Josephine replied coolly, "and to deliver this." She handed him the formal notice Eleanor had prepared, outlining the property boundaries and the legal consequences of future trespass. Jenkins scanned the document, his expression darkening. "Mighty official for a neighborly misunderstanding." "We believe in clear communication," Eleanor stated, every inch the professional she had been, "to prevent future misunderstandings." Jenkins looked from one woman to another, measuring the unexpected solidarity before him. Whatever he had expected, tears, pleading, or incompetence, he was instead facing a united front of capable women clearly prepared to defend their interests. "Heard you ladies were planning some changes to the broken wheel," he said finally, addressing Josephine but glancing at the others. "Dairy operation and such." "Among other initiatives," Josephine confirmed, "we're diversifying our operations. To better utilize the land," Jenkins nodded slowly. "My wife's been after me to get fresh milk for the children. Maybe we could discuss a regular purchase arrangement, assuming quality's good." It was an olive branch, thinly disguised as business interest, but clear in its intent. Jenkins was acknowledging their right to operate and offering potential cooperation rather than conflict. "We'll be accepting advance orders in early spring," Catherine replied, stepping naturally into her role as future dairy manager. "We'd be pleased to include your family's needs in our production planning." As they parted ways with surprising civility. Josephine realized they had achieved something significant, not just defending their boundaries, but establishing themselves as legitimate business operators worthy of respect rather than charity cases or temporary oddities. That went better than expected, Rachel observed, as they began repairing the damaged fence line. Jenkins is pragmatic, Josephine explained. Once he realized we're serious about the partnership and prepared to defend our interests, he adjusted his approach. He'd rather have us as business associates than adversaries. It won't be the last test, Eleanor predicted, holding fence posts steady while Catherine secured them. But each one we pass strengthens our position in the community. Working together under the February sun, cold but bright against the snow-covered landscape, the four women solidified not just the physical boundary of their property, but the bonds of their partnership. Each brought different strengths to the task. Josephine's knowledge of proper fence construction, Catherine's physical strength, Eleanor's precise measurements, Rachel's attentive care for everyone's well-being in the harsh conditions. As they finished the repairs and prepared to return to the ranch house, Josephine paused to survey the northern pasture stretching before them. Land her father had purchased for future expansion, dreams he hadn't lived to fulfill. Now that same land represented new possibilities, new dreams shaped by women society had discarded, but who had found in each other the strength to forge their own destiny. In spring this will be green again, she said, more to herself than the others. Good grazing for the cattle before we move them to summer pastures. And beyond that rise would be perfect for the expanded garden, Rachel added, pointing to a protected slope, southern exposure, natural windbreak from the cottonwoods. The old line shack could be converted for cheese production, Catherine suggested. It would need work, but the location is ideal, close to water and easily accessible from the main house. Eleanor smiled at their planning. You're already seeing it as it will be, not as it is now. That's the essence of building something worthwhile, the vision to see beyond current limitations. As they rode home in the lengthening February, shadows, Josephine reflected on how dramatically her perspective had changed since that autumn night at the Rusty Nail Saloon. What had begun as an impulsive act of rescue had evolved into something far more significant. A reimagining of what was possible when women combined their strengths instead of competing for limited opportunities in a man's world. The Broken Wheel Ranch, once a burden she bore alone, had become the foundation for a shared vision that expanded with each passing day. Spring would bring new challenges, but for the first time in years, Josephine faced the future with genuine hope rather than grim determination. What they were building together was more than a business. It was a declaration of independence, a statement that women didn't need to be auctioned to the highest bidder to secure their place in the world. They could instead create their own opportunities, define their own success, and lift each other up in the process. As the ranch house came into view, smoke rising welcomingly from the chimney against the darkening sky, Josephine felt a sense of homecoming deeper than mere return to familiar surroundings. These women, once strangers thrown together by desperate circumstances, had become the family she never expected to find, not bound by blood, but by choice, shared purpose, and mutual respect. Tomorrow would bring its own trials, but they would face them together. 4 women rewriting their stories on their own terms. 1 fence post, 1 ledger entry, 1 healing remedy, 1 milking cow at a time. March arrived with the promise of renewal. Warm Chinook winds sweeping down from the mountains to melt the snowdrifts and reveal patches of earth that had lain dormant through the long winter. The transformation of the landscape mirrored the changes at Broken Wheel Ranch, where preparations for spring initiatives were underway with growing excitement and purpose. In the barn, converted temporarily into a workshop, Josephine and Catherine labored over plans for the dairy facility, measuring lumber and calculating materials needed for renovations. "If we extend this wall by 8 feet," Josephine suggested, pointing to the diagram spread between them, "we could house 12 cows comfortably instead of 8. Catherine nodded, making notes. The additional capacity would allow us to supply not just Jenkins and local families, but potentially the hotel and restaurant in town. That means nearly doubling our expected revenue in the first year." Their planning was interrupted by the arrival of Thomas Reed's wagon, laden with seedlings for Rachel's expanded garden and building supplies for their various projects. Eleanor emerged from the house to greet him, her usually reserved demeanor softening visibly as he handed her. Down from the wagon seat, "The Territorial Agriculture Office approved your grant application," he announced as the others gathered around. $500 for innovative diversification of ranch operations. The funds should arrive next week. Eleanor's careful planning and eloquent application had secured government support that would accelerate their expansion plans significantly. The official recognition of their partnership as a legitimate business enterprise carried weight beyond the financial benefits, establishing their credibility in territorial records. "There's more," Reed continued, pulling a newspaper from his coat. "The Denver Post is running a series on new economic developments in the territories. I took the liberty of mentioning your operation to the journalist." He handed the paper to Josephine, who found herself staring at a small but prominent article titled "Women Pioneers' New Approach to Ranching." 4 women establishing a diversified agricultural partnership in Colorado Territory demonstrates the changing face of frontier enterprise, she read aloud. Under the leadership of established rancher Josephine Mercer, the Broken Wheel Ranch is expanding beyond traditional cattle operations to include dairy production, medicinal herbs, and market gardening, creating a model that maximizes limited resources through innovative collaboration. "They make us sound quite impressive," Rachel observed, reading over Josephine's shoulder. "You are impressive," Reed replied simply. "What you're building here deserves recognition." The article brought both opportunities and complications. Within days, letters arrived from other women in similar circumstances, seeking advice or inquiring about possible positions. A representative from a Denver mercantile company expressed interest in establishing a regular order for Rachel's medicinal preparations once production reached commercial scale. Most surprisingly, Judge Harrison visited personally to offer his congratulations and informed them that several town council members were reconsidering their previous opposition to women's participation in the business association. "Progress comes in unexpected ways," the judge observed as he prepared to leave. "Your success makes it harder for them to justify excluding other qualified women from business opportunities." Not all reactions were positive, however. The morning after the judge's visit, they awoke to find their main gate broken and an offensive message painted on the barn door. "Husband stealers go home." "Charming," Eleanor remarked dryly as they surveyed the damage. "I wasn't aware we'd stolen anyone's husband." "It's what we represent, not what we've done," Josephine explained, scrubbing at the paint. "Independent women threatening the established order." Catherine helped repair the gate, her face troubled. "Do you think this is just the beginning? Will there be more resistance as we become more successful?" "Probably," Josephine admitted. "People fear change, especially when it challenges their assumptions about how the world should work." Rachel joined them with coffee and fresh bread. "Then we must show them there's nothing to fear, that our success doesn't diminish anyone else's opportunities, but actually creates new ones for the entire community." Their philosophy was soon tested when Josephine received a letter from the bank announcing an inspection of the property to verify improvements claimed in their loan extension application. The inspection was scheduled for April 15th, giving them just 3 weeks to demonstrate tangible progress on their expansion plans. "This is deliberate obstruction," Eleanor fumed, reviewing the letter. "Our application clearly stated that major improvements would begin in May, after the final frost." "Nevertheless, we need to show substantial progress," Josephine replied pragmatically, "which means accelerating our timeline significantly." What followed was an extraordinary mobilization of resources and determination. From dawn until dusk, the women worked alongside Ezra and day laborers hired from town, transforming the ranch according to their carefully developed plans. The old line shack was reinforced and expanded for dairy processing, garden beds were prepared, and the first cold hardy seedlings planted, and the barn was reorganized to accommodate both cattle and dairy operations efficiently. Thomas Reed brought additional workers from his logging camp to help with the heavier construction, while Catherine surprised everyone with her skill at carpentry, learned during years working alongside her father. Rachel supervised the garden expansion with meticulous attention to companion planting and medicinal herb placement, while Eleanor managed supplies, budgets, and documentation of every improvement for the bank inspectors. Josephine found herself marveling at the transformation, not just of the ranch, but of the women themselves. Catherine, once trembling with fear at the auction, now confidently directed men twice her size in construction techniques. Rachel, who had fled her hometown in disgrace, was establishing what promised to become the territory's most comprehensive medicinal herb garden. Eleanor, the schoolteacher deemed unsuitable because she remained unmarried, was creating business systems that would ensure the ranch's financial stability for years to come. And she herself had changed perhaps most of all, from a woman grimly clinging to her inheritance alone to the leader of a partnership built on mutual respect and shared vision. The ranch that had been slowly dying under the weight of one person's limited resources was now blooming with new possibilities born from collaborative imagination and effort. The night before the bank inspection, exhausted but satisfied with their progress, the four partners gathered around the kitchen table to review their accomplishments and prepare their presentation. "Even if we only receive a 6-month extension on the loan, it will be enough," Eleanor assured them, reviewing the financial projections. "By then, the dairy operation should be generating regular income, and we'll have the first medicinal preparations ready for market." "What if they refuse?" Catherine asked, voicing the fear they all shared. "What if all this work isn't enough to convince them?" Josephine considered the question seriously. "Then we find another way. We've come too far together to be stopped by one obstacle, no matter how significant." Mr. Reed mentioned that his bank in Denver might be interested in refinancing our loan if the local institution proves difficult, Eleanor added. "He's quite confident in our business model." Rachel smiled knowingly. "Mr. Reed seems quite confident in many aspects of our enterprise, particularly those involving our business manager." Eleanor's cheeks colored slightly. "His interest in the ranch's success is purely practical. The timber operation benefits from having reliable local suppliers." "Of course," Josephine agreed with a straight face. "Just as his weekly visits are solely to check on construction progress, not to engage you in 2-hour discussions about territorial politics." The gentle teasing lightened the mood, reminding them that amid the intense work and serious challenges, they had also built friendships that sustained them through difficulties. What had begun as a rescue had evolved into a chosen family, each woman bringing not just her skills, but her whole self to their shared enterprise. The bank inspection the following day proved less adversarial than they had feared. Mr. Hollister, the loan officer, appeared genuinely impressed by the scope and quality of the improvements, taking detailed notes as they guided him through each area of development. "The dairy facility is particularly well designed," he commented, as Catherine explained the planned processing workflow. Most new operations underestimate the importance of proper milk handling and storage. In the expanded garden, Rachel described their approach to maximizing yield through companion planting and season extension techniques, demonstrating the cold frames already nurturing early seedlings. By staggering plantings and using these protective covers, we'll have fresh produce. Weeks before and after the traditional growing season, Eleanor presented the financial projections and marketing arrangements, including letters of intent from potential customers in town and neighboring communities. Her precise documentation and conservative revenue estimates clearly resonated with the banker's cautious nature. Throughout the tour, Josephine found herself watching Hollister's reactions closely, alert for signs of the prejudice that had informed previous banking decisions regarding her property. To her surprise, his assessment seemed genuinely focused on the business fundamentals rather than the gender of the operators. "You've accomplished an impressive amount of work in a short time," he acknowledged as they concluded the inspection. "The diversification strategy addresses many of the vulnerabilities that concerned the bank previously." "Then you'll recommend extending the loan?" Eleanor asked directly. Hollister hesitated. "The final decision isn't mine alone, but my report will certainly note the significant improvements and viable business model you've established. I expect a decision within the week." After he departed, the women allowed themselves a cautious celebration, recognizing that while the immediate hurdle had been addressed competently, the ultimate decision remained uncertain. "He was more receptive than I expected," Eleanor observed. "The quality of our work spoke for itself." "That's always been the way," Josephine replied. "Actions convince when words cannot. People who would never accept our partnership in theory can't deny the tangible results." The bank's decision arrived 5 days later, a 1-year extension with options for conversion to a regular commercial loan based on demonstrated profitability. The letter specifically cited the impressive diversification initiative and professional management as factors in their approval. "It's really happening," Catherine said wonderingly as they reviewed the document. "We're actually going to make this work." "Did you doubt it?" Rachel asked, squeezing her hand. "Not our abilities," Catherine clarified, "but the world's willingness to let us try. I expected more doors to be slammed in our faces." "Some will be," Josephine cautioned. "This is just the beginning. But each success makes the next one more attainable, as we prove our capability not just to ourselves, but to everyone watching." The arrival of May brought their first real test as a commercial enterprise. The initial dairy herd, carefully selected by Catherine for their productivity and temperament, arrived from a breeder in Denver. Setting up the operation required round-the-clock attention during the adjustment period, with all 4 women taking shifts to monitor the animal's health and comfort in their new surroundings. Simultaneously, Rachel's garden demanded intensive planting work to take advantage of the spring growing season, while Eleanor coordinated deliveries of equipment for the dairy processing facility. Josephine managed the traditional ranch operations, including preparations for the summer cattle drive to higher pastures. The intensity of work created inevitable tensions. After a particularly exhausting day, when equipment deliveries were delayed and 2 cows showed signs of illness, tempers flared during the evening meal. "The supplier promised delivery by noon," Eleanor said sharply when Josephine questioned. "The schedule change. I can't control their incompetence." "We needed those separator parts today," Josephine countered. "Every day we delay processing is money lost." "Perhaps if you'd assisted with the unloading instead of riding fence lines, we could have managed better," Eleanor suggested with uncharacteristic criticism. "The boundary check couldn't wait," Josephine defended. "Jenkins reported seeing unknown riders near our north pasture. Catherine slammed her cup down with unexpected force. "Stop it, both of you. We're all exhausted and frustrated, but turning on each other is exactly what those who want us to fail are hoping for." Her outburst shocked them into silence. Catherine, the youngest and usually quietest partner, rarely asserted herself so forcefully. "Catherine's right," Rachel said after a moment. "We're letting pressure divide us instead of remembering what we're building together." Josephine took a deep breath, recognizing the truth in their words. "I apologize, Eleanor. The fence check was necessary, but I should have communicated better about timing. And I shouldn't have been short with you," Eleanor acknowledged. "The delivery problems weren't your fault." Catherine looked between them with satisfaction. "That's better. We can disagree without becoming adversaries. That's what makes our partnership different from traditional business relationships. We're committed to each other beyond the bottom line." The moment marked an important evolution in their partnership, establishing that they could navigate conflicts constructively rather than allowing them to fester into deeper divisions. As the spring work continued at its relentless pace, they developed better systems for communication and mutual support, recognizing when any partner needed assistance or respite. By early June, their efforts began bearing tangible fruit. The first dairy products, fresh milk, butter and soft cheese, were ready for market, with Catherine personally delivering initial orders to expectant customers in town. Rachel's early garden crops provided fresh greens and herbs when most gardens were just being planted, creating immediate demand. Even the cattle operation showed improvement, with healthier calves and better weight gain thanks to improved pasture management. Their most significant victory, however, came from an unexpected quarter. The Cottonwood Gulch Business Association, which had previously rejected Josephine's membership application solely on the basis of gender, sent a formal invitation for the Broken Wheel Ranch Partnership to join as full members with voting rights. "This isn't just recognition of our business," Eleanor noted as they reviewed the invitation. "It's acknowledgement that women deserve an equal voice in community development. It also gives us influence beyond our property boundaries," Josephine added. "Voting rights on water usage, road improvements, freight rates, issues that directly impact our operations." The invitation prompted a pivotal conversation about their long-term vision for the partnership. Seated on the porch after dinner, watching the summer sunset paint the distant mountains in shades of gold and purple, they finally addressed the question that had remained unspoken through months of planning and work. "When we began this arrangement, it was understood to be temporary," Josephine said carefully. "Spring has come and gone. You're all free to choose your paths forward." Catherine looked alarmed. "Are you suggesting we should leave?" "No," Josephine clarified quickly. "I'm acknowledging that you have choices now that weren't available when you arrived. The partnership is succeeding. You each have marketable skills and community recognition. If you wish to move on, to marry, to establish independent businesses, to return east, you could do so from a position of strength rather than necessity." A thoughtful silence followed, as each woman considered the options now available. To them, options that had seemed impossible on that autumn night at the Rusty Nail Saloon. "I have no desire to leave," Eleanor finally stated with characteristic directness. "What we're building here is more significant than any individual opportunity elsewhere. We're creating a model that challenges fundamental assumptions about women's capabilities and place in society." Rachel nodded agreement. "I came west seeking escape from a painful past. I found not just safety, but purpose, using my knowledge to help others while building something sustainable." "The auction was the lowest point of my life," Catherine said quietly. "I felt utterly powerless, my future decided by whoever offered the most money. Here I've discovered strengths I never knew I possessed and work that brings genuine satisfaction. Why would I abandon that?" Josephine felt a weight lift from her heart. Though she had come to depend on these women as partners and friends, she had been prepared to release them to their own destinies, if that was their wish. Their choice to remain and continue building together represented commitment beyond business practicality, a shared vision of what was possible when women supported rather than competed with one another. "Then we make it official," she proposed. "Not just a temporary arrangement, but a formal, permanent partnership with equal shares and responsibilities." "We should celebrate this decision," Rachel suggested. "Mark it as the true beginning of our enterprise, now that it's freely chosen by all." They agreed to host a small gathering at the ranch, inviting those who had supported their unconventional venture: Judge Harrison, Thomas Reed, and even Morris Jenkins, whose initial boundary testing had evolved into neighborly cooperation. The evening of the celebration arrived with perfect June weather, the ranch looking its best with flourishing gardens, contentedly grazing cattle, and buildings freshly painted for the occasion. Each woman had contributed to the preparations, creating an atmosphere that showcased both their individual talents and collective achievements. As twilight softened the landscape and lanterns were lit across the yard, Josephine found herself standing slightly apart, observing the gathering, with the sense of wonder at how dramatically her life had changed in less than a year. Thomas Reed approached, offering a glass of cider. "You seem contemplative for someone celebrating a triumph." "I'm reflecting on unexpected journeys," she replied. "If I hadn't gone to town that night, if you hadn't arrived when you did." "Life turns on such moments," Reed agreed. "But what matters is what we build from them. You've transformed an impulsive act of compassion into something revolutionary." "We've transformed it," Josephine corrected, watching Catherine confidently explaining dairy operations to Jenkins, Rachel discussing medicinal applications with the judge's wife, and Eleanor engaged in animated conversation with business associates from Denver, each of us bringing different strengths to a shared vision. "A model that could be replicated elsewhere," Reed suggested. "There are many women in similar circumstances, with talents wasted because society offers limited paths." Josephine considered this. Perhaps that's the larger purpose in what began as simply helping 4 specific women in immediate need, creating a template others might follow. "Your partnership has already inspired similar arrangements," Reed informed her. "A millinery business in Denver, a boarding house in Central City. Women pooling resources and skills rather than competing for limited opportunities." The concept that their example might spark wider change added dimension to their achievement. They weren't just securing their own futures, but potentially opening doors for countless other women trapped by societal expectations and limited options. Judge Harrison called for attention, raising his glass in a toast. "To the women of Broken Wheel Ranch," he announced, "who have demonstrated that the frontier spirit of innovation and determination knows no gender. May your partnership prosper and inspire others to similar courage." As glasses were raised in response, Josephine felt a profound sense of fulfillment. The struggling ranch that had been her burden had transformed into a thriving enterprise built on cooperation rather than competition, mutual support rather than solitary struggle. The women's society had deemed disposable, to be auctioned, married off, or discarded, had created something valuable and enduring through combined strength and shared purpose. Later that evening, as the celebration wound down and guests departed, the 4 partners lingered on the porch, reluctant to end a day that marked such a significant milestone in their journey together. "I keep thinking about that night at the saloon," Catherine mused, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. "How terrified I was, how hopeless everything seemed." "And now look at you," Rachel said warmly, "managing an entire dairy operation, making decisions that affect our collective future." "Look at all of us," Eleanor amended, "each using talents that might have been wasted in more traditional arrangements." Josephine surveyed the ranch spreading before them, The gardens now flourishing with early summer growth, the barn, where healthy cattle sheltered, the dairy facility producing goods already in demand throughout the county. More than the physical improvements, she valued the intangible transformation, the sense of purpose and possibility that permeated every aspect of their shared enterprise. When I bought Rachel's contract that night, I thought I was simply preventing a specific injustice, she reflected. I never imagined we would build something that might change how women see themselves and their possibilities. Perhaps that's the most important product of our partnership, Eleanor suggested. Not the dairy goods or medicinal preparations, or even financial success, but the demonstration that women can determine their own destinies when they support rather than undermine one another. As darkness settled fully over the Colorado Valley, bringing the cool clarity of a mountain summer night, the four women who had forged an unlikely family from desperate circumstances sat together in companionable silence. Each had come to Broken Wheel Ranch through different paths of hardship and loss, each carrying wounds from a world that valued women primarily as possessions or ornaments. Together, they had created something revolutionary, not just a successful business, enterprise, but a new model for female cooperation and self-determination. The auction that might have destroyed them had instead become the catalyst for liberation, proving that even the darkest moments could lead to unexpected light when courage met opportunity and individual strength combined for collective purpose. The Broken Wheel Ranch, once struggling under the weight of one woman's isolated determination, now flourished through the diverse talents and shared vision of four partners who had discovered that true freedom came not from independence alone, but from interdependence freely chosen. As Josephine looked at the women beside her, no longer desperate strangers, but family in every meaningful sense, she understood that they had built something far more valuable than a successful ranch. They had created a template for possibility, a demonstration that women need not be defined by society's limited expectations, but could instead write their own stories of dignity, purpose, and mutual empowerment. What had begun with a desperate bid at a midnight auction had blossomed into a testament to female resilience and collaboration. A new beginning not just for four specific women, but potentially for countless others who might follow their example of turning society's rejection into the foundation for revolutionary reinvention. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.